The sounds of battle ring out. Hordes of Russian invaders charge towards a Ukrainian defensive position on the orders of a commander who knows precisely how this fight will end. Russia is destined to lose. The reason? Its soldiers lack equipment like armor, such as tanks or infantry fighting vehicles. They are not even on motorbikes, which might give them the speed and agility to evade Ukrainian drones. No. Into the fight, they ride on something more equine. Beasts of burden on four legs are now taking Russia's forces into the fray. It's a sign of just how desperate Vladimir Putin has grown, with Russian troops now riding horses straight into the drone-filled hell of the Ukraine war. What's worse, as United 24 media reported on October 7th, the Russian soldier seen on horseback has already been killed. According to the outlet, 2025 is the first time Russia has deployed cavalry against an enemy since the 1950s. And this isn't just about using horses or donkeys to haul equipment. A fully kitted-out Russian soldier was sent into an assault on horseback, and for some inexplicable reason, was apparently expected to survive Ukraine's drone waves to reach an objective. It's completely nonsensical. A horseback rider stands little chance in modern warfare, even without factoring in drones. In the modern era, a single rifle shot is all it takes to eliminate a cavalry unit. This is far from medieval combat. It's not an era where soldiers needed minutes to reload a musket for a chance shot at a rider. This is 2025. There are drones, rifles, and mines. Essentially, any weapon Ukraine could choose to use is sufficient to neutralize a Russian on horseback. Unsurprisingly, it was a drone that ultimately finished off the ill-fated Russian cavalryman. And the entire fiasco is confirmed by footage. The video, shared by the Yigal Levine X account, was noted to be from a drone operated by a member of Ukraine's 132nd Battalion. At first, the footage seems rather nondescript. It shows what could otherwise be a scenic countryside, filmed from the first-person view, or FPV perspective of a drone flying along a path. As the drone moves forward, what initially looks like a blob in the distance slowly comes into focus. It is not a blob, it is a horse. One might think that perhaps a single wild horse had somehow survived amidst the warfare and was wandering the fields. But no, that is not what is happening. As the drone gets closer, it becomes evident that a man is with the horse. Dressed in military fatigues, he is completely unaware of the drone's approach. This man is a Russian soldier, and he is about to become a casualty. The moment the operator comprehends what their FPV drone is seeing, the drone accelerates. It locks onto the soldier, who grasps the danger he is in far too late. His final attempt to leap away from his horse is unsuccessful, and the Ukrainian drone scores a direct hit on the ground between the two. Both the horse and the rider perished because of Putin's desperation, sending his soldiers to fight on animals rather than in armored vehicles. Defense Blog, which also featured the video, reports that the targeted horse rider was not some lone maverick who thought it was a good idea to attack on horseback. He was a member of an entire cavalry detachment used by Russia to storm a Ukrainian defensive position. That assault, obviously, was a failure, with Defense Blog noting that the Russian soldiers had to dismount and use their horses as cover in an effort to evade Ukraine's drones. This adds a new layer to the FPV drone footage. The Russian soldier may not have been idly tending to his horse after all. He was likely hiding behind it, but was undone because his horse was positioned in the wrong direction. Ukrainian soldiers take no pleasure in any of this. While creating more Russian casualties is Ukraine's main objective, the country's soldiers would prefer not to be sending drones to explode on horses. Defense Blog highlights the comments of one Ukrainian service member who captures the shock and sadness of these events. The horses, of course, are a pity, but no matter how you look at it, it's a combat unit. Sad? Yes. But the work is being done to reduce human casualties, the service member stated. One could almost call this callous on Putin's part. There is simply no reason for Russia to be using horses for assaults in 2025. Even the most rudimentary civilian vehicles would provide more speed and protection. But Putin seems indifferent. Horses are just a method to transport his cannon fodder troops to the locations where they are meant to die and soak up Ukrainian ammunition, so the Russian military is content to use them. As the service member said, Ukraine's soldiers must treat these horses as military units, which means they must be eliminated. What is clear here is a particularly nasty use of horses by Russia. But this isn't the first instance of Russia using such animals in Ukraine. Back in February, Newsweek reported that Russia had begun deploying donkeys and, surprisingly, even camels into Ukraine. In those cases, the animals were not being ridden into combat. Instead, Russia was using them to transport equipment between units, making sure Russian soldiers had access to necessary goods that could no longer be moved by vehicles because too many mechanized units had been destroyed or disabled. The outlet even included a quote from Lieutenant General Viktor Sobolev, a member of the Russian State Duma Defense Committee, who suggested Russia was drawing inspiration from World War II. At that time, Russia used dogs and donkeys to transport essentials. It was now being compelled to do the same in Ukraine. There are currently very big difficulties in providing units and subdivisions, including, that is, assault squads and groups and so on, with ammunition, military technical equipment, and food too, Sobolev claimed. He also added that dogs and cats are being deployed to help combat mice in Russia's trenches. Sobolev mentioned horses as well, noting their work in the trenches. Regarding camels, a photo began circulating on social media in February. The image, shared by the Meanwhile in Ukraine Facebook account, depicts 3 Russian soldiers with a camel. The channel expressed hope that the image was doctored. However, since camels are raised in the Russian republics of Taiva and Kalmykia, the photo could be authentic. The Moscow Times also corroborated the Russian military's use of donkeys in a March 2025 article. It too connected this usage to a shortage of frontline equipment, while pointing out that both horses and donkeys were being used by Russia for transport. Apparently, this is a normal practice, according to Sobolev, as quoted by the outlet. Perhaps it is. One might even contend that using these kinds of animals is preferable to having soldiers carry equipment, at least for short distances. However, the events of early October are very different from the Russian military using horses and donkeys to haul gear. The soldier taken out by the Ukrainian drone was a cavalryman. He and his unit had launched an attack on horseback, only to learn very quickly why it was a terrible idea. Now that Russia has witnessed how vulnerable its cavalry concept is to drones, one would think it might abandon the idea. But that would be to overestimate Russia's ability to learn from its mistakes. Not only is Russia fine with its soldiers riding into battle on horseback, it appears that cavalry training is on the verge of being formalized in the Russian military. To reiterate, cavalry training is being formalized. This means what looks like an isolated incident of Russian soldiers attacking on horseback could soon become a common sight in Ukraine. This information comes from Meduza, which reported on an October story by the pro-Russian outlet Kommersant. Kommersant claimed Russia is seeking to conduct a full revival of its cavalry units. The Russian outlet interviewed the unnamed commander of Russia's Storm Special Forces unit, who stated on Russian state television that the soldiers he commands are now learning to ride on horseback. The justifications given are strange, to put it mildly. The commander claims that horses possess better instincts than humans, making them less likely to step on landmines. Additionally, they have superior eyesight for navigating in the dark and can handle off-road terrain. The commander even detailed how his troops would utilize their horses. The tactic involves 2 men riding on a single horse. One steers and the other provides fire cover. Upon arrival at the assault site, both fighters dismount and take the next enemy stronghold, the commander explained. There are glaring holes to poke in these comments. For example, it's plausible that a horse can navigate in the dark better than a human without night vision gear. But how does that benefit the soldiers on the horse? They won't see where they are going, and they will have no chance of spotting or neutralizing incoming threats in time. It seems Russia's riders must simply trust their horses' instincts to guide them. As for the 2-person strategy the Storm commander described, providing fire cover from a jostling horse is surely much more difficult than offering it from the ground. Could a Russian soldier, already sharing a horse with another man in full combat gear, realistically shoot down an incoming Ukrainian drone while his comrade rides. It seems highly improbable. To many, it will sound utterly ludicrous. Furthermore, as Medusa points out, horses have certain disadvantages the Storm Commander seems to overlook. While the animals are fast and agile, they also require training and feeding, both of which consume time and resources that Russia is short on. Additionally, horses have a lower load capacity than vehicles. As noted earlier, even if Russia is struggling to equip soldiers with armor for assaults, a civilian vehicle would appear to be a better option than a horse. Regarding landmines, a horse might or might not be heavy enough to set off an anti-tank mine. But an anti-personnel mine, that's a different matter entirely. Considering Ukraine obtained this type of mine from the US in November 2024, it's highly likely they are being used to defend against Russian attacks. A horse would not survive such a mine, nor would its rider. So the crucial question must be asked, why? Despite the claims of the Storm Commander, horses are not being ridden into battle because they are more effective than tanks, armored vehicles, or nearly any other type of vehicle Russia could be using instead. That is perfectly clear. A horse, no matter how fast, cannot outrun an FPV drone. According to PetMD, a thoroughbred horse might reach speeds of 44 miles per hour at a full sprint over a short distance. Russia will not be using thoroughbreds. Its horses will be significantly slower, and their riders are not world-class jockeys. PTMD also notes that a typical horse's top galloping speed is between 25 and 35 miles per hour. The average horse also cannot maintain this speed for long. In contrast, even a basic Ukrainian FPV drone can reach and sustain speeds of 37 miles per hour, with many models being even faster. Even if a horse could briefly outrun a drone, it wouldn't be long before the animal tired and the drone caught up. Combat effectiveness is not part of the equation here. So, once more, one must ask, why? United 24 offers some potential reasons for Russia's return to centuries-old tradition by sending soldiers into combat on horseback, beginning with Russia's cultural fascination with horses. The outlet says horses are so deeply integrated into the mythology of past Russian military victories that their use in 2025 is almost more symbolic than practical. But even that is a simplification. The Cossacks, renowned for their use of horses, established major communities in both modern-day Ukraine, especially the Zaporizhian Cossacks, and in Russia, Don region. But while these traditions have deep shared roots, it is Russia, not Ukraine, that is riding horses into battle today. Still, the Russian affinity for horses persisted well into the 20th century. And in fairness to Russia, the animals were useful as recently as World War II. This is clear from a June 1942 article in The War Illustrated, shared by Traces of War. Russia has millions of horses in service with the Red Army. Without them, it would be impossible to maintain the constant stream of supplies to the millions of men holding the millions of miles-long front, The War Illustrated wrote over 80 years ago. Hundreds of thousands are actually in the firing line, hauling guns and ammunition wagons. Great numbers more are harnessed to ambulances and supply vehicles. This sounds familiar. It is exactly what horses and similar animals were used for in Ukraine before being deployed as cavalry units. Following World War II, United 24 explains, the horse transformed into a symbol of political power within the Soviet Union. Propaganda posters frequently depicted Russian soldiers on horseback, and in this, we might see a clue as to why Russians are now riding horses into combat. Footage has shown one of these riders being eliminated by a drone. It is conceivable that very different images are being shown inside Russia. Perhaps pictures of Russian soldiers riding bravely, harkening back to the Soviet era that Putin seems so determined to restore. All this talk of symbolism is fine. It might even be something Russia would promote, if not for the fact that the only reason horses are being talked about is because a Ukrainian drone destroyed a Russian cavalryman. But if you strip away the symbolism, there are three real reasons for Russia's use of horses in Ukraine. Russia is low on fuel. It has lost too many vehicles and its soldiers are utterly exhausted. On the fuel issue, Ukraine has spent the last few months crippling Russia's oil refining capacity. The BBC reports that since January 2024, Ukraine has launched strikes against 21 of Russia's 38 major oil refineries. In August 2025 alone, 14 refineries were targeted with drone attacks. September saw another 8 hit, and in many instances, these were not single strikes. Ukraine would strike, wait, and then strike again to make sure the refineries it took offline remained offline. The effect of these strikes on Russia has been massive. The country is currently experiencing a fuel crisis, as Ukraine has successfully taken out up to 40% of Russia's refining capacity by late September and early October 2025, after months of cumulative attacks. While this is affecting everyday Russians through domestic gasoline shortages, it is also being felt on the front lines. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, Oleksandr Syrsky, made this clear near the end of September. The capabilities of the enemy's military-industrial complex have been significantly reduced. We can see this on the battlefield, Syrsky said. This is a fuel crisis in Russia, which directly affects logistics and the supply of its army. In essence, Russia lacks sufficient gasoline to send to the front. Horses do not run on gasoline, so in Putin's mind, using them is problem solved. Even if Russia had a reliable gasoline supply and the logistics to deliver it to its troops, it would be irrelevant. Gasoline and diesel are useless without the vehicles they power. This points to another reason Russia is using horses for assaults. It is running low on tanks and armored vehicles, and this has been the case for some time. In July, Novaya Gazeta reported that Russia's military vehicle reserves are nearing empty. It pointed to statistics from the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, which stated that Russia has only 46% of its pre-war tank reserves and 42% of its infantry fighting vehicles remaining. At first glance, those numbers might seem adequate. However, the majority of Russia's remaining vehicle stockpiles consist of old Soviet-era equipment or armor in terrible condition. The ISW predicts that at this rate, Russia will completely run out of usable armor reserves by the end of 2025. Russia's situation may not be quite so dire, but it does offer more insight into why it's using horses in Ukraine. The vehicles Russia's military needs, for both transporting equipment and launching attacks, are far scarcer than when Putin began his invasion. The use of horses reveals desperation. The previously mentioned Storm Unit commander might try to frame the use of horses as a deliberate strategy. In reality, however, it is an admission from Moscow that it lacks enough equipment to send to its troops. Some can still ride into battle in armor. Those who can't are apparently turning to horses. Finally, there is the exhaustion factor. Perhaps due to its armor and fuel problems, Russia has increasingly turned to small infantry assaults instead of the larger mechanized assaults it preferred earlier in the war. RBC Ukraine reported on this tactic back in July, highlighting that some of Russia's infantry units are as small as 3 or 4 soldiers. These units are meant to infiltrate Ukrainian defenses and hold their ground long enough for reinforcements to show up. But consider what this strategy must mean for Russia's soldiers. They are being made to march over long distances, carrying all their equipment for their assaults, while simultaneously trying to stay hidden from Ukraine's drones. Exhaustion must be setting in to such a degree that even the units that successfully infiltrate Ukraine's defenses are unable to put up much of a fight when discovered. With horses, at least, these small units can cover more ground more quickly while letting the animals carry the heavy gear. But once again, this is the job of modern military vehicles. Not highly vulnerable animals that have no defense against any of the weapons Ukraine employs. The video of a Ukrainian drone taking out a Russian cavalryman is many things. For Russia, it is humiliating, as it reveals just how dire the country's military situation has become. The video is almost tragic, showing a Russian soldier's final moments of panic before he and a horse that should never have been on a battlefield are eliminated. But above all, the footage highlights Russia's desperation in Ukraine. Using horses is not symbolic, no matter how much the Kremlin might want to pretend it is. It is foolish, and Russia is already paying the price for it. Still, it's not as if Russia is having much more success with its modern weaponry. Several of its supposedly unbeatable weapons have been erased from the map, as Ukraine has destroyed them one by one. Find out more in our video, and be sure to subscribe to Warzone Party for more coverage of Russia's most bizarre tactics in the Ukraine war.